She was serving coffee when the clock broke the silence of the room with a dry, metallic, almost cruel sound. Glass cracked on the counter, and the smell of burnt coffee filled the air, thick as the weight of shame. Everyone looked at her. The thin waitress, apron wrinkled, hands trembling, with the look of someone who had apologized too many times in life. The manager frowned, a customer chuckled, and she simply lowered her head, carefully collecting the shards, as if gathering pieces of herself. It was always like this. She fixed what was broken, even if what was broken was her. Outside, the city shimmered wet, the cold seeping from the sidewalks like a secret. People hurried past, faceless, timeless. She watched them through the windows, imagining what it would be like to live without needing to ask permission to exist. This was her world. Dirty tables, yellow lights, a shift that never ended. Still, there was something in the way she moved her hands, how she wiped the counter, how she straightened the chairs. A kind of silent dignity, unseen by anyone, yet seemingly guarded by the universe itself. It was then that the woman entered. An expensive dress, rigid posture, rings that reflected the light like tiny blades. She wasn't the type of customer who usually stopped there. Her chauffeur waited outside, umbrella open like an inverted crown. She sat at the corner table, ordered only water, and stayed there, staring into space. The waitress, Sarah, noticed that the woman's fingers trembled discreetly, and that her pale face hid more than just weariness. But Sarah asked nothing. She served the water, smiled timidly, and stepped away, until she heard the dull thud of a body falling. The glass rolled, shattering as it hit the floor. For a second, no one moved. The sound of traffic outside seemed distant, muffled. Sarah ran. She knelt beside the fallen woman without thinking about who she was, or the price of her dress. Sarah's hands moved instinctively, firm, decisive. She did what she remembered learning from watching her mother try to save her father years ago, without success. Now it was Sarah who was fighting against time. Sweat ran down her face, her heart pounded loudly in her chest, and the world seemed to spin around that breath that wouldn't come. When the paramedics arrived, Sarah was still performing chest compressions on the woman, her hands covered in tears and effort. She stayed there until she saw the body react. A gasp, a slight movement, life returning in a whisper of sound. Then she stepped back, exhausted, invisible again. The chauffeur thanked her coldly, without making eye contact, and the black car disappeared into the rain. Sarah didn't know the woman's name, nor that her simple gesture would end up crossing worlds. The next day, the restaurant was more crowded than ever. Journalists circled outside, cameras, flashes, rumors. The manager spoke softly on the phone, pale. Sarah heard the name for the first time. The woman she had saved was the mother of Ethan Sterling, the tycoon who dominated half the city, the man everyone called the Vampire King. The nickname came from his coldness, his way of looking at people as if he could see beyond them, without ever getting involved, a man who didn't believe in gratitude or in luck. In the afternoon, the sound of cars stopped. Conversations ceased. The air seemed to change. He entered. No announcement, no entourage, just his presence. Tall, in a dark suit, with a gaze that made time hesitate. Sarah froze for an instant. He walked between the tables as if each step measured the space between power and humanity. The manager bowed slightly. Customers pretended not to look. Sarah, standing behind the counter, felt her stomach clench. He didn't speak. He simply left an envelope on the counter with the Sterling family seal. He said something inaudible to the manager and left. Inside the envelope, her name, handwritten, an invitation. The curious glances of her colleagues followed her for the rest of the shift, but she didn't open it there. She put the paper in her pocket, her heart beating erratically. Only at home, alone, within her peeling walls, did she read the contents. An invitation to visit the hospital. On the appointed day, she went. She wore the only decent outfit she owned. She walked through the white corridors, where the sound of her footsteps seemed to echo too much. She recognized the woman in the bed, pale but alive. Beside her, the man with the cold gaze, now more human than his nickname suggested. He watched in silence. When he noticed Sarah's presence, he stood up. The nurse adjusted the flowers on the table and stepped away, leaving them there in the strange void between gratitude and power. He studied her with the same look of someone unaccustomed to being saved. Sarah didn't know what to say, and silence became the only possible language. Time passed slowly. In his expression, there was something contained, a kind of respect that needed no words. His mother, still weak, held a tissue. On the table, a small silver box. Nothing was explained. Nothing needed to be. The following days brought rumors. The waitress had been fired. The restaurant, mysteriously bought. No one knew by whom. People whispered that she had received money, that she had a protector, that she had enchanted the impossible man. But the truth was simpler. She had simply done what was right. And because of that, perhaps, fate had decided to observe her more closely. Unbeknownst to her, her actions awakened something dormant. The magnate began appearing in places he never went. Street fairs, small coffee shops, common spaces. Always alone, always distant, but with the same attentive gaze, as if searching for something he couldn't name. Security guards commented, partners found it strange. He, who had always spoken to the world through orders and contracts, now hesitated before signing any paper. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to go on with her life. She got another job, even smaller, in a corner cafe. But something in her had changed. The way she looked at people, the way she walked, how she breathed. It was as if she had touched a secret and didn't know what it was. Sometimes at night, she remembered his eyes. That brief second when power seemed tired, almost human. And then, one day, the same black car stopped in front of the new cafe. She felt her heart race, but pretended not to see. The chauffeur entered, handed her an envelope, and left. Inside, just one sentence. She's awake and wants to see you. The hospital was high up in the city, and the path seemed longer than before. The sun shone through the windows like a promise. There the woman waited for her, now stronger, with a light, almost maternal smile. In the room, a vase of white flowers and an open book. The man stood by the window, his gaze lost on the horizon. When she entered, he turned slowly. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was the silence of those who recognize destiny, even without understanding it. He said nothing, and she didn't need to either. His mother watched, at peace, like someone seeing something begin anew. The evening light entered through the glass, gilding their faces, transforming the air into a promise. No words could explain what existed between the three of them. Only what was felt. Life, fragile and persistent, uniting worlds that should never have crossed. And that afternoon, for the first time, power bowed before simplicity. The next day, the world seemed to breathe differently. The rain had stopped, and the streets exuded that faint vapor that rises from wet asphalt. Sarah returned to work at the small cafe. The same walls, the same cups, the same hurried customers. But something invisible had changed. The silver box Eleanor Sterling had given her remained closed on her nightstand. She hadn't had the courage to open it. That morning, however, she decided it would be different. She woke up earlier, dressed with a care she wasn't used to, tied her hair in a new way. In the mirror, the same face, but a different gaze. She took the box with her. At the cafe, the hours dragged on. Every time the door chime rang, her heart raced. She expected to see the dark suit, the icy gaze, but they were just ordinary faces, simple orders, the same routine. At 3 p.m, when the rush died down, she sat for a moment in a back chair. She opened the box. Inside, a card with the address of an apartment on Magnolia Lane, a set of silver keys, and a handwritten note. For a new beginning. Nothing more, nothing less. Her heart pounded in her throat. Magnolia Lane was on the other side of the city, far from the noise, the broken storefronts, the peeling buildings where she had always lived. It was a place where the sun seemed to have permission to shine brighter, where trees grew in perfect rows, where people walked without haste. A different world, protected by invisible walls of privilege. After her shift, she decided to go there. The bus swayed, too crowded, too noisy. She held the silver box against her chest, like a talisman. Through the window, the city gradually transformed. The buildings taller, the streets cleaner, the air less heavy. She got off at the last stop, before the neighborhood where buses didn't venture. She walked the rest of the way, feeling like an intruder. Building number 47 had an elegant, discreet facade. The doorman watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She showed the keys, mentioned apartment 701. The man's demeanor immediately changed. "Ah, Miss Sarah, we were expecting you." Mr. Sterling left specific instructions. Sarah. It was strange to hear her own name spoken with such deference, as if suddenly she was someone important. The elevator ascended silently, as if it understood the gravity of the moment. The doors opened to a carpeted hallway, soft lights. She paused before door 701, took a deep breath, and inserted the key. The apartment was like an open music box, spacious, bright, perfectly furnished. Fresh flowers on the table, a kitchen that gleamed, never used. Floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city below, now lighting its first lights at the start of evening. A place that seemed to have been waiting for someone for a long time. In the master bedroom, on the impeccably made bed, an envelope. When she opened it, a deed. The apartment was in her name. Along with it, a short letter from Ethan's mother. "One life for another. This is just the beginning of my gratitude. I would like to talk, if you'll permit it." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of that gesture. It wasn't just a roof, it was walls that separated her from everything she knew. A gift that could be a golden cage, or a chance. Night fell completely as she remained there, between two worlds, uncertain to which she belonged. The next day, she didn't go to work. She called the cafe, said she was sick. For the first time in years, she allowed herself that small act of rebellion. She spent the day exploring the new apartment, opening drawers that contained clothes in her size, books that seemed selected for her taste, though she had never spoken of it to anyone, as if someone had researched her life, her habits, her unspoken dreams. At dusk, the doorbell rang. Her heart leaped. Opening the door, she found not Ethan, but his mother, Eleanor Sterling. Stronger now, still elegant, but with a new softness in her eyes. "May I come in?" The conversation that followed was like a slow, cautious river, finding its way between stones. Eleanor spoke of her life, the marriage to a powerful and cruel man, the widowhood that brought relief, the only son who grew up in his father's shadow, learning to confuse strength with coldness. She spoke of the illness that had silently consumed her for years, of the doctors who said she had little time left. That day, at the cafe, I had just received the latest results. I was at peace with the end. But then you... Eleanor paused, emotion making her voice more fragile. "You didn't just save me. The doctor said what happened was inexplicable. The collapse should have been fatal. But after that day, the test showed something different. The disease retreated, as if your touch had awakened in my body the will to fight." Sarah listened in silence, unable to process it all. There was no miracle in her hands, just the instinct of someone who sees another person suffering and cannot stand idly by. But for Eleanor, it was much more than a first aid act. It was redemption. "My son doesn't know how to handle this," Eleanor continued. "Ethan built an empire based on the idea that everything can be controlled, predicted, bought. You challenge that vision with a simple gesture. He is disturbed, fascinated. I've never seen him like this." The night wore on, the city lights creating patterns on the walls. Eleanor bid farewell with an unexpected hug, leaving in the air an expensive perfume and the promise of a new beginning. Before leaving, she handed Sarah a card with a phone number. "If you need anything, anytime." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The ceiling was too high, the bed too soft, the silence too deep. She felt like a displaced piece in a perfect puzzle. What did that family want from her? What did they expect? And why did she feel that, despite the apparent generosity, something unsaid lingered in the air? The following days were an exercise in adaptation. Sarah decided to continue working at the cafe, despite the confused looks of her colleagues when they found out her new address. The money was little, but it was hers, earned with her own hands. Something in her refused to simply accept the life offered by the Sterlings. In the third week, the routine was broken. The morning newspaper customer, the man with the red tie and reading glasses, left a copy of the Financial Times open on a specific page. The headline jumped out, "Ethan Sterling announces $2 billion charitable foundation." The photo showed the impeccably suited businessman, serious as ever, inaugurating what appeared to be a hospital. "It's because of her, you know," the customer said when Sarah collected the cup. "The waitress who saved Eleanor Sterling. They say the Vampire King is changing. The whole city is buzzing." Sarah felt her face burn. She mumbled something inaudible and moved away. In her apron pocket, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Would you like to see the foundation?" E.S. Her pulse quickened. The initials were unmistakable. She spent the rest of the day distracted, dropping cutlery, messing up orders. When her shift ended, she found the same black car waiting. The chauffeur opened the door without a word. The foundation operated in a restored building in the historic downtown district. It didn't have the ostentatious luxury she expected, but a simple, functional elegance. In the lobby, doctors, nurses, and people from all walks of life moved with purpose. A place that breathed service, not status. He waited for her on the top floor, not in the main office, as she had imagined, but in a small meeting room overlooking the park. Ethan Sterling seemed different there. Still formal, still contained, but with something new in his eyes. Less distant, less cold. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice was deeper and softer than she expected. "I wanted you to see this." He gestured towards the building, the people below. "It's yours too." Sarah didn't understand. "Mine? What do you mean?" "You planted the seed, even without knowing it." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. He seemed to search for the right words, something uncommon for someone accustomed to giving orders. "My mother told me about you, not just about the day you saved her, but about who you are, how you live, what you sacrifice. I had never really thought about people like you." There was a raw honesty in those words that disarmed her. It wasn't condescension, it was recognition. From someone who had lived their entire life in an ivory tower, suddenly seeing the world outside. "The foundation will offer medical care to people without resources. Vocational training, scholarships. We've already bought 3 hospitals that were failing, and we're going to renovate them completely." He spoke now with more enthusiasm, as if the project were a child. "I want you to work with us, not as a figurehead or a symbol, but in developing the programs. You know the reality we want to change? I don't." Sarah felt the world spin. It was too much to process, too much to believe. "Why? Why me? Why now? People like me have always existed. Your mother could have died in anyone else's hands." Ethan smiled lightly, a gesture so rare it seemed to transform his face. "Exactly. It was chance that brought us together, or destiny if you prefer. But it was your choice that changed everything. You didn't think about who she was, about what you could gain. You just acted. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" The silence that followed was full of possibilities. Outside, the city continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the moment of transformation occurring in that small room. 2 people from separate universes, finding a point of convergence. "You don't have to answer now," he said finally. "Think about it. Talk to my mother if you want. The door is open." When Sarah left the building, the sun was beginning to set. Shadows lengthened on the sidewalks. People returned home after a day's work. Ordinary lives with ordinary worries, like hers, until a few weeks ago. She decided to walk back to the new apartment. She needed to feel the city beneath her feet, breathe the cool air, organize her thoughts. The path was long, but each step seemed to bring her not only closer to home, but to a decision. The next morning, she called the cafe. She resigned. Then, she picked up her phone and typed a simple message. "When can I start?" The months that followed were like a fever dream. Sarah immersed herself in the foundation's work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. She discovered talents she didn't know she possessed. Organization, communication, natural leadership. People trusted her, opened up, told their stories. And she listened, as she always had, but now with the power to truly help. Ethan observed her from a distance, rarely interfering. In weekly meetings, he sat at the back of the room, listening to her reports with genuine attention. Sometimes he asked a sharp question that revealed how much he was truly absorbing. Other times, he simply nodded, silently approving her initiatives. The press soon discovered the story. They tried to turn it into a modern fairy tale, the waitress who won the magnate's heart. But it wasn't like that. What existed between them was more complex, deeper, and in some ways more fragile than romance. It was mutual respect, curiosity, the strange feeling that together they could build something greater than both of them. One evening, after a long meeting with international investors, Ethan invited her to dinner. Not in a luxurious restaurant as she feared, but in a small bistro in the historic district, an unpretentious place with wooden tables and candlelight. They sat in a discreet corner, away from curious eyes. "My mother told me about your childhood," he said, after the first glass of wine. "About your father?" Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't a subject she usually shared. She shouldn't have done that. "I asked her to. I wanted to understand." His eyes, normally so controlled, revealed something close to vulnerability. How can someone who lost so much give so much? How do you not become like me? The question hung between them, too honest to be ignored, too difficult to be answered easily. Sarah looked at the man across from her, powerful, feared, called the Vampire King, and she saw only someone trying to find a different path. "My father died in my arms when I was 12, she began, her voice low. "Heart attack. I tried to save him like I saw in the movies. It didn't work. My mother lost herself after that. Alcohol, wrong men, debts. I ended up alone at 17. But everywhere I worked, I found small acts of kindness. The lady who gave me a coat in the winter, the manager who lent me money for rent, the clinic doctor who saw me after hours." She paused, choosing her words. "You ask how I didn't become bitter. The truth is, I had no choice. When you have nothing, you realize the only thing no one can take from you is how you choose to treat others." Ethan listened in silence, his face an impenetrable mask. But his eyes told a different story. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarser. "I had everything. I always had everything. And still, it was never enough." "It's harder for you," she said, surprising both of them with the statement. "When you have everything, it's harder to see the value in small things, in the simple act of being alive, of breathing, of being able to choose." The conversation flowed to other topics. The foundation, future projects, stories of the city they both knew from completely different perspectives. When the restaurant began to close, they realized hours had passed. The world outside continued its course, indifferent to the small revolution happening at that table. Ethan insisted on walking her home. They walked side by side through the old streets, a comfortable silence between them. At the building door, he stopped. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For reminding me that there's another way." She smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile. "Good night, Ethan." It was the first time she had used his first name. It sounded strange and familiar at the same time. He nodded, turned to leave, but stopped. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "None of this is out of guilt or gratitude. I want you to know that." Before she could answer, he had already walked away, his tall figure disappearing into the evening mist. Sarah entered the building with a strange feeling in her chest, as if something was beginning, or perhaps ending, or perhaps both. The next morning, Eleanor appeared without warning. She carried flowers and a worried expression. "Ethan told me about dinner," she said as Sarah prepared coffee. "He seemed different." "Different how?" Eleanor hesitated, searching for the right word. "Alive. He seemed alive." She sat at the kitchen table watching Sarah with a knowing look. "You know, ever since he was little, Ethan has always been reserved. His father taught him that feelings were weaknesses, that power was everything. He grew up believing he needed to be invulnerable. I think yesterday was the first time in years he truly spoke to someone. Really." Sarah served the coffee in silence, processing those words. She didn't want to be responsible for changing anyone. She didn't want that power. She just wanted to live her life, do her job, perhaps make some difference in the world. "I'm not trying to pressure you," Eleanor continued, as if reading her thoughts. "I just wanted you to understand. He's trying. It's new for him. The days that followed brought a new dynamic. Ethan began to participate more actively in projects, visiting communities, listening to stories, seeing with his own eyes the realities that were once just numbers in reports. The press reported, incredulously, the transformation of the Vampire King into an engaged philanthropist. His company's shares fluctuated. Some investors questioned, others applauded the new direction. In one of the most ambitious projects, they decided to rehabilitate an abandoned hospital in Sarah's old neighborhood. The place had been closed for years, a victim of corruption and mismanagement. On the day of the initial inspection, Ethan made a point of being present, walking through the empty corridors, seeing potential where others saw only ruins. It was on that day that Sarah finally understood what was happening. It wasn't just about charity or redemption. It was about building a bridge between worlds that should never meet, but which, when they did, could create something extraordinary. As they returned, the car stopped at a red light. Through the window, they saw a woman trying to calm a crying baby. A fine rain began to fall, and she had no umbrella. Without saying anything, Ethan opened the car door, took off his expensive jacket, and extended it to the woman, shielding her and the child from the rain. The gesture was so natural, so simple, that it took everyone by surprise. The chauffeur, the woman, Sarah herself. When he returned to the car, wet and without his jacket, there was a different glow in his eyes. "I finally understand," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "This is what it feels like." That night, Sarah's phone rang late. It was Ethan. "I need to show you something. Can it be now?" Half an hour later, they were on the rooftop of the tallest building in the city, the headquarters of the Sterling Empire. The view was breathtaking, light stretching to the horizon, the city breathing under its different facets, luxury and misery, power and submission, life and death. I spent my whole life looking at this and seeing only numbers, opportunities, calculated risks, Ethan said, the wind ruffling his always impeccable hair. I never really saw people, lives, stories. Sarah remained silent, letting him speak. There was urgency in his voice, as if he had come to an important conclusion and needed to share it before his courage waned. "I want to do more," he continued. "Not just the foundation. I want to change how my businesses work, how we treat employees, suppliers, communities. I want to build something that truly matters." He turned to her, and in the dark his eyes seemed more vulnerable, more human. "And I want you with me on this journey. Not as an employee, as a partner, as equals." Sarah's heart raced. There were many layers to that request. Professional, personal, emotional. "Why? Why me?" "Because you see what I can't see. You know what I don't know. And most importantly, because I trust you. I trust almost no one." The wind picked up, bringing the smell of rain. The city below them seemed to hold its breath, awaiting her answer. Sarah thought of everything that had happened. The invisible waitress, the spilled coffee, the fallen woman, the envelope, the apartment, the foundation. An improbable sequence of events that had brought her here, to this moment, to this choice. "I don't know if I can be what you expect," she said finally. "I know nothing about running companies or leading people." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "I know nothing about compassion or human connection. It seems we have a lot to learn from each other." The proposal wasn't just professional, they both knew that. It was the beginning of something deeper, more complex, a possibility neither of them would have imagined months ago. "I'll think about it," she replied honestly. "It's a big decision." He nodded, respecting her space. "Of course." When they parted that night, something had changed. An open door, a possible path. Two worlds that could, perhaps, find a way to coexist. In the following weeks, Sarah's life became a whirlwind. The media discovered her increasingly important role in Ethan Sterling's life and business. Reporters followed her, speculations arose, stories were invented. Some painted her as an opportunist, others as a modern heroine. The truth, as always, was more complex than any headline. Eleanor became an unexpected ally, shielding her from excessive exposure, advising her on how to navigate this new world. "I know it's not easy," she said one afternoon, as they had tea in her mansion's garden. When I married Richard Sterling, I also came from another world. Not as distant as yours, but distant enough to feel like a stranger for years. How did you adapt? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor's gaze became distant. I didn't adapt. I lost myself. I became what they expected me to be. The perfect wife, silent, decorative. Only after Richard died could I begin to find myself again. She touched Sarah's hand gently. Don't make the same mistake. Don't lose yourself. Ethan maintained a respectful distance, giving her space to think. They continued working together at the foundation, developing projects, helping people. The dynamic between them had changed. Deeper, more sincere, laden with unspoken possibilities. One day, while visiting the hospital under renovation in Sarah's old neighborhood, she took him to see the place where she had grown up. A small apartment on the third floor of a worn-out building, now occupied by another family. The woman who opened the door recognized Sarah and, shocked by Ethan Sterling's presence, allowed them to enter. The place was small, simple, but clean and organized. Children played in the room that had once been Sarah's. On the kitchen wall, the same damp stains she remembered from childhood. "This is where my father died," she said softly, standing in the middle of the living room. "In this exact spot." Ethan remained silent, absorbing the moment, the space, the history. There was no pity in his gaze, only understanding. Respect. When they left, he held her hand for the first time, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that said everything words could not express. At the building door, they found a group of children playing ball in the potholed street. One of them recognized Sarah, the neighbor's son she always gave candies to when she was little. "Aunt Sarah, are you really going to build a hospital here? Can we go there when we get sick?" Sarah's face lit up. "Yes, Noah, it's going to be the best hospital in the city." The boy smiled, revealing missing baby teeth. Then he looked at Ethan with childish curiosity. "Are you her boyfriend?" Sarah blushed, but before she could answer, Ethan crouched down to the boy's height. "I'm her friend. We're building the hospital together." "Cool," the boy replied, satisfied with the simple answer. "You look like a vampire, you know, like the ones in the movies." Instead of taking offense, Ethan laughed, a genuine, surprising sound. "I've been told that before." That visit changed something fundamental. As they returned to the car, Sarah felt a certainty growing within her. This was the way. Not just the foundation or the social projects, but the possibility of uniting worlds, of building bridges where before there were only walls. "I accept," she said simply when they were in the car. Ethan turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Are you sure?" "I am, but with one condition." Her voice was firm, decided. "We will never forget where we came from. Me from my roots, you from yours. It's what makes us who we are." That night, they had dinner together at her apartment. Nothing sophisticated, a simple meal Sarah prepared. They ate, talked, laughed. Without pressure, without expectations, just two people discovering each other, building something new brick by brick. When Ethan was about to leave, he paused at the door. He looked at her for a long moment, as if wanting to memorize every detail. "Do you know what fascinates me most about you?" he asked finally. "What?" "Your ability to see beauty where others see only problems, to find hope where others see only despair." He touched her face lightly. "You taught me to see the world with new eyes." The kiss that followed was gentle, almost hesitant. A beginning, not an end. A door opening, not closing. When they separated, there was no need for words, just the comfortable silence of two souls who, against all odds, had found each other. The following months were a time of transformation, for both of them, for the foundation, for the entire city. The Sterling Empire began to change from the inside out. Sustainability policies, fair treatment of employees, involvement with communities. The hospital in Sarah's old neighborhood was inaugurated with her father's name, a tribute that made her cry for the first time in years. The press continued to follow the story, now with more respect, less sensationalism. The nickname Vampire King gradually fell into disuse. In its place, new narratives emerged. The visionary philanthropist, the humanized businessman, the man who found his heart. On an autumn afternoon, as they walked through the city park, Ethan stopped under a tree whose red leaves fell like tiny flames around them. "Remember when we first met? At the restaurant?" Sarah smiled. "How could I forget? You scared me." "I was so lost," he confessed, his gaze distant. "I lived in a fortress of my own making, protected from everything, connected to nothing, and then you saved my mother, and without realizing it, you saved me too." She squeezed his hand. It wasn't a rescue, it was a meeting of two worlds that needed each other. He pulled her close, hugging her as if she were something precious, fragile. "Thank you for teaching me to be human again." The city around them continued its rhythm. People rushing to work, children going to school, lives intertwining in a constant dance of meetings and goodbyes. But there, in that moment, time seemed suspended. Two hearts beating to the same rhythm, two souls that had found shelter in each other. And at that precise instant, under the rain of red leaves, power and simplicity were no longer opposing forces. They were simply two faces of the same love, a love that transformed, healed, redeemed. A love that proved that, sometimes, the most improbable encounters are precisely those that the universe planned most carefully. Winter arrived with the typical mildness of that region, more gray than cold, more melancholy than harshness. The city seemed to retreat under low clouds, lights turning on earlier in the windows, people walking faster, heads down. But in the main office of the Sterling Foundation, the atmosphere was one of contained celebration. The institution's first anniversary also marked the announcement of its expansion into 3 new underserved neighborhoods. What had begun as a local project had become an internationally studied model, the perfect fusion of private resources and first-hand knowledge, of economic power and social sensitivity. Sarah walked among the guests with a poise that still surprised her. She wore a simple suit, elegant without ostentation. Her hair, once always pulled back in a tight bun, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She conversed with politicians, business leaders, community leaders, moving between worlds with the fluidity of someone who knows both intimately. From afar, Ethan watched her with a mixture of pride and admiration. He himself had changed, his demeanor less severe, his smile more frequent, a lightness no one would ever associate with the former vampire king. Still, he remained the man of vision, the strategist, the empire builder. The difference was that now he built with a purpose greater than the mere accumulation of power. Eleanor approached her son, leaning lightly on his arm. The illness had retreated, but not without leaving its marks. Still, there was a vitality in her eyes that few had seen before. "She is extraordinary," she commented, following Ethan's gaze. "Yes," he replied simply. Words had never been his strong suit, especially for expressing emotions. "Have you decided when you're going to tell her?" Ethan hesitated. In the inner pocket of his jacket, the small velvet box weighed like lead. "Tonight, after everyone has left." Eleanor smiled, gently squeezing her son's arm. "She'll say yes." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see the way she looks at you. It's the same look you have now." When the reception ended and the last guests said their goodbyes, Sarah found Ethan on the veranda overlooking the foundation's garden, a meticulously planned green space with native trees and a small pond. Discreet lights illuminated the stone path, creating soft shadows on the grass. "It was a success," she said, joining him at the railing. "We secured commitments for all the new projects." He nodded, distracted. There was a tension in his shoulders that she knew well, the weight of unexpressed thoughts, decisions being weighed. "What's wrong?" she asked, touching his arm. "Something's bothering you." Ethan took a deep breath, turning to face her. "It's not worry, it's—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. For a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms with surgical precision, that hesitation was revealing. "Sarah, before you, my life was predictable, controlled, secure. I built walls so high around myself that no one could truly reach me." She listened in silence, giving him space to continue. "And then you appeared. You didn't try to scale the walls. You didn't even notice them. You simply were there. Real, authentic, doing what you believed was right, without calculations, without hidden agendas." His voice deepened, became more intense. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that compassion isn't naivete, that there's strength in opening yourself to the world, even knowing you might get hurt. He took the small box from his pocket, opening it carefully. Inside, there was no ostentatious ring as one might expect, but a simple, elegant piece. A dark blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I'm not asking you to enter my world," he continued, looking into her eyes. "I'm asking that we continue building this new world together. One where power and simplicity, strength and tenderness can coexist. A world that began when you saved my mother, but that can be so much more." Sarah looked at the ring, then at the man in front of her. No longer the feared magnate, no longer the vampire king, but simply Ethan. A complex, imperfect man, still learning to navigate his own emotions, but genuinely committed to change. With her. "Yes," she answered, her voice firm despite the tears that were beginning to form. "Yes, I want to build that world with you." When he slid the ring onto her finger, there seemed to be a greater meaning in that gesture. Not just the union of two people, but the union of two realities that, against all odds, had found a common language. The wedding was low-key, against all societal and media expectations. Only family and close friends in a small, restored chapel in Sarah's old neighborhood. She insisted on this, not to reject Ethan's world, but to honor her roots. She wore a simple, soft white dress, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Among the guests, an improbable mix. High-ranking executives alongside waitresses from the old cafe, renowned doctors chatting with community nurses, Eleanor elegant as ever, exchanging recipes with Sarah's old neighbor. When the vows were exchanged, there were no grandiose declarations or impossible promises. Just the sincere commitment of two beings who had found, in each other, the best version of themselves. The honeymoon was equally unconventional. 2 weeks traveling through the country's interior, visiting remote communities, identifying needs, planting seeds for future projects. For some, it might seem like work, not leisure. For them, it was the perfect celebration of what they had built together. Upon their return, news awaited them. Eleanor had suffered a relapse. The illness, previously in remission, was now returning with more force. Doctors were cautious in their prognoses, speaking of months, perhaps a year. No more than that. Ethan was devastated, though he tried to hide it. Sarah found him late at night in his study, staring at a photograph of the three of them, him, her, and his mother, taken on their wedding day. She said nothing, just sat beside him, holding his hand. "She looks so happy in this photo," he said finally, his voice choked. "So alive." "And she is," Sarah replied softly. "Every day is a gift, Ethan. Not a right, a gift. Your mother understands that better than anyone." In the months that followed, they divided their time between expanding the foundation and caring for Eleanor. The disease advanced, relentless, but there was a serenity in the woman that inspired everyone around her. She insisted on remaining involved in the projects, offering ideas, contacting old acquaintances to support the initiatives. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after a round of painful treatments, Eleanor asked to be alone with Sarah. Sitting in the mansion's garden, under the weak winter sun, the older woman held her daughter-in-law's hands with surprising strength. "I want to thank you," Eleanor said, her eyes tired but lucid. "For what?" "For saving my son." A soft smile illuminated her pale face. "That day at the cafe, you saved my life, yes. But what you did afterward, giving Ethan his humanity back, helping him rediscover his heart, that was the real miracle." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but maintained her composure. Eleanor needed her strength now, not her sorrow. He always had that heart. He was just afraid to use it. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Fear does that to us. It builds walls where there should be bridges." She looked at the sky, breathing deeply the cold air. "You know, when Richard died, I felt relief. What a terrible thing to admit, isn't it? To feel relief at the death of your son's father. But our marriage was a golden cage. He never loved me. He only possessed me." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I was afraid Ethan would become like his father. For years, I watched for the signs, The same coldness, the same obsession with control, the same inability to trust. They called him the Vampire King, and the nickname was terribly fitting, sucking the life around him without truly living it. Her gaze returned to Sarah, intense despite her physical fragility. And then you appeared. With your saving hands, your heart that doesn't calculate, your dignity that doesn't depend on possessions. It was as if the universe had sent exactly the person he needed to find. Sarah didn't know what to say. She just squeezed Eleanor's hands, conveying in the gesture what words could not express. "Promise me you'll keep saving him," Eleanor asked, her voice now softer, more urgent. "Even when I'm no longer here, even when it's difficult, even when he tries to retreat behind the walls." "I promise," Sarah replied, and it was more than a word. It was a vow. 2 weeks later, Eleanor passed away. Peacefully, in her sleep, in her own bed. Ethan was by her side, holding her hand. Sarah had stepped out only for a moment to get more water. When she returned, she found her husband in silence, his head bowed, still holding his mother's now inert hand. The funeral was discreet, as Eleanor would have wished. No ostentation, no elaborate speeches, just the people who truly mattered, gathered to say goodbye. Ethan remained stoic throughout the ceremony, his face an impenetrable mask of control. Only Sarah noticed the slight tremor of his hands, the tension in his jaw, the eyes that didn't blink to hold back the tears that refused to fall. In the weeks that followed, he plunged into work with an almost feverish intensity. New initiatives for the foundation, business expansion, meetings that stretched into the early hours. Sarah watched him with growing concern, recognizing the pattern. Pain being channeled into action, grief transformed into relentless productivity. One night, when he didn't come home again, she decided to intervene. She found him in the mansion's study, surrounded by papers, the computer still on, his expression exhausted. Without saying anything, she simply approached, closed the laptop, and hugged him. For a moment, he resisted, his body tense, distant. Then, like a dam finally giving way, he collapsed. The sobs came deep, painful, as if torn from a long-sealed place. She just held him, allowing the pain to finally find expression. "I miss her so much," he confessed when he finally managed to speak. "And I'm afraid. I'm afraid I won't be the man she believed I could be, of disappointing her." Sarah held his face in her hands, looking him directly in the eyes. "Ethan, you already are that man. Every life the foundation touches, every ethical decision you make, every time you choose compassion over power. You honor her memory." He nodded slowly, allowing the words to penetrate. That night, they went home together. They slept embraced, as if one needed to ensure the other was still there, that the world, despite the loss, kept turning. The next morning, Ethan woke up different. There was a calm in his eyes, a silent resolution. During coffee, he proposed something unexpected. "I want to transform my mother's mansion into a community center, with a library, space for courses, medical care. What do you think?" Sarah smiled, recognizing in the gesture not only generosity, but healing. "I think she would love that." The Eleanor Sterling Community Center project quickly became both their priority. Every room of the old mansion was rethought to serve the community. The sumptuous dining room transformed into a community cafeteria. The study became a library. The guest rooms, classrooms, and workshops. Only one space remained untouched. The garden that Eleanor loved so much, preserved as an oasis of peace in the midst of urban hustle. The inauguration coincided with the first anniversary of Eleanor's death. A simple ceremony without grand speeches or ribbon cuttings. Just the doors opening and the community entering. Children running through the corridors, seniors exploring the library, young people signing up for vocational courses. Ethan remained somewhat distant, observing. Sarah approached, intertwining her fingers with his. "What are you thinking?" He looked around, at the people, at the transformed space, at the life that pulsed where before there had been only isolated opulence. "I'm thinking that perhaps this is what matters in the end. Not what we accumulate, but what we share. Not the walls we build, but the doors we open. Sarah squeezed his hand, recognizing in his words not only the man she loved, but also the journey they had traveled together. From the invisible waitress who saved a life to the feared magnate who found his heart, from worlds separated by social abysses to the bridge built with compassion and purpose. That night, walking through the silent garden under the moonlight, Sarah felt a movement within her. Soft, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. A new life. Fruit of the improbable love between two worlds that should never have met. She didn't tell Ethan immediately. She kept the secret close to her heart for a few days, savoring the promise, the miracle. When she finally spoke, she chose the moment carefully. A quiet Sunday morning, the sun streaming through the windows, coffee being shared in comfortable silence. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, without preamble. Ethan froze, his cup halfway to his mouth. For an instant, it seemed as if the whole world had stopped to hear the sound of those words falling into the space between them. Then, slowly, the face of the man once called the Vampire King transformed, not with the contained smile she expected, but with tears. Tears of joy, of fear, of hope, of gratitude. "A child," he murmured, as if testing the word, its weight, its meaning. "Our child." "Or a daughter," Sarah smiled. "It's still too early to tell." He knelt beside her, placing his hand on her still flat belly. The gesture was so full of reverence, so devoid of pretense, that Sarah felt her own heart expand within her chest. This was the man Eleanor had seen beyond the mask. Vulnerable, capable of love, deeply human. The months that followed were a time of preparation, not only of the physical space to receive the child, but also emotionally. Ethan obsessively read about parenthood, child development, education. Sarah watched him with affection, recognizing in his behavior something few would see. Fear. Fear of repeating patterns, of not being enough, of failing as his own father had failed. "You are not him," she said one night, as Ethan gazed at an old photograph of himself with his father. Two rigid figures, distant even in physical proximity. "You chose a different path. What if I don't know how to do this?" The vulnerability in his voice was palpable. "How to be a good father." Sarah took his hand, placing it again on her now visibly rounded belly. "Did you feel that? The baby is kicking. It already knows you. It already trusts you. The rest we'll learn together." It was a calm pregnancy, despite Sarah's age. Her body, which had always been strong, did not betray her. She worked at the foundation until her 8th month, when she finally yielded to Ethan's insistence to slow down. Not out of fragility, but to savor those last moments. The miracle growing within her, the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined years ago. Eleanor Sarah Sterling was born on a spring morning when the first flowers bloomed in the garden named after her grandmother. A strong girl with a lusty cry and intense eyes that seemed to observe the world with precocious curiosity. When the nurse placed the small bundle in Ethan's arms, something happened, visible only to Sarah, who watched from the hospital bed. The last vestige of the Vampire King completely vanished. In place of the feared magnate, the ruthless businessman, there was just a father, frightened, awestruck, irrevocably transformed by the miracle of the life he held. "Hello, little Eleanor," he whispered, his voice choked. "Welcome to our world, the world your mother and I are building for you." Sarah watched the scene with an overflowing heart. She thought of the long journey that had brought them there. The spilled coffee, the fallen woman, the mysterious envelope, the foundation, the wedding, the loss, and now this new beginning. She thought of how unpredictable life was in its wisdom, uniting souls that seemed destined never to meet. As Ethan brought little Eleanor to meet her mother, Sarah remembered the words the first Eleanor had once told her. It was as if the universe had sent exactly the person he needed to find. Perhaps it was so with all true encounters, not mere coincidences, but necessary convergences of souls that have something to learn from each other. The Sterling family left the hospital 3 days later, welcomed by a city that no longer saw Ethan as the feared Vampire King, but as the man who had transformed his fortune into purpose, his power into compassion. Little Eleanor would grow up in this new world, neither the privileged and isolated universe of her father, nor the difficulties her mother had faced, but something built with elements of both opportunity and humanity, resources and purpose. In the years that followed, the Sterling Foundation grew beyond the city's borders, becoming an international model of effective philanthropy. The Eleanor Sterling Center expanded to other neighborhoods, creating spaces for welcoming, learning, and transformation. Little Eleanor grew up surrounded not only by love and privilege, but also by values, watching her parents build bridges where others saw only chasms. And Sarah, the waitress who once collected shards of glass while customers laughed, now led teams, inspired communities, transformed lives. Not because she had become someone different, but because finally the world recognized what had always been there. A silent strength, an unwavering dignity, a heart that simply knew no other way but to help. On an autumn afternoon, when little Eleanor was 5 years old, the family visited the cafe where it all began. The place had changed, renovated, expanded, now a cooperative managed by its own employees. But the corner table was still there, the table where Eleanor Sterling had fallen, where Sarah had knelt to save her, where destiny had woven the first threads of this improbable story. They sat there, Ethan, Sarah, and little Eleanor, who nibbled a cookie while drawing in a notepad. A family like any other, and at the same time, extraordinary in their journey. "You know what I sometimes think about?" Ethan said, watching his daughter with the gaze of someone contemplating an everyday miracle. "I think about how a single moment, a single choice can change everything. If my mother hadn't come to this cafe that day, if you hadn't been working that shift, if you hadn't acted so quickly." Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with his across the table. Perhaps some encounters are inevitable. Perhaps some souls are destined to meet, no matter the path. Little Eleanor looked up from her drawing, observing her parents with the peculiar wisdom of children. "Are you talking about the day Grandma Eleanor got sick and Mommy saved her?" "Yes, sweetie," Sarah replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "It was in this place, at this table." The girl nodded seriously, absorbing the information as an important part of her story. Then, she returned to her drawing, colorful lines that, looking closer, represented 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. That night, after putting Eleanor to bed, Ethan and Sarah stood on their home's balcony watching the city lights. No longer the same city of years ago, now fairer, more integrated, still imperfect but moving in the right direction. "Thank you," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" "For teaching me to see beyond the walls. For showing me that power without purpose is just a golden cage." He touched her face with reverence. "For saving me, even when I didn't know I was lost." Sarah smiled, recognizing in his words not only gratitude, but also the complete journey, from the vampire king to the open-hearted man, from intimidating power to transforming power. It wasn't an instant change, nor a miraculous conversion, but a path of small steps, daily choices, constant learning. And there, under the starry sky, 2 people whom destiny had united against all odds shared not only a love, but a vision of a world where bridges replace walls, where compassion is stronger than fear, where true power lies not in dominating, but in serving. It was the world they were building for Eleanor, for everyone, one brick at a time. That night, the touch that had awakened the king was no longer just a memory, but a promise fulfilled, that even the coldest hearts can learn to love, that even the most distant worlds can meet, and that sometimes it is in simplicity that we find our true strength. And in that city, which had once trembled under the cold gaze of the man known as the Vampire King, something new now flourished, not an empire built on fear, but a community woven with threads of compassion, purpose, and hope. The kind of legacy that remains not in concrete and steel, but in the hearts of people, the only power that truly matters.